No, we're going to have Greater Israel, and we're just going to bash anybody that doesn't like it.
What is Greater Israel?
Greater Israel means either that Israel controls not only its geographic territory, but it essentially controls or annexes the West Bank, the Golan Heights, which they've just enlarged to Gaza, and East Jerusalem. So everything that was captured in 1967, Netanyahu explicitly said, we're never giving that back. There are religious zealots, I would use even stronger terms, who use the book of Joshua, which is 2,700 years ago, that said, well, God gave us everything from the river in Egypt, meaning the Nile, to the Euphrates. And there are zealots in Israel, and they're in the government, who believe, yes, this is God's ordinance. We're going to take whatever we want.
Egypt, Israel, Ethiopia, and Nile water conspiracies. The art of the deal. Each time U.S. President Donald Trump raises the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam / GERD, we are reminded of a passage from his book, The Art of the Deal, in which he advises novice investors to maximize your options. Trump argues that even the most promising deals tend to fail, so success requires preparing at least half a dozen fallback strategies, because, as he puts it, anything is possible. Trump addressed the Renaissance Dam dispute for the fourth time in less than a month, reiterating his concern that the dam poses a significant threat to Egypt's water security. He blamed the previous Democratic administration for having financed and enabled the project. He claimed coordination with Cairo was underway and spoke vaguely of a pretty long-term solution, without providing further details. The Nile and Gaza, a transactional bargain? Against this backdrop, it is not unreasonable to connect Trump's comments on the dam to broader regional developments, most notably Gaza. The issue had not featured on his public agenda during his second term until it became relevant to a potential ceasefire deal between Israel and Iran. That moment was soon followed by Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, the public resurfacing of proposals for a so-called humanitarian city, and renewed media advocacy from pro-Israel outlets promoting long-standing ideas to either relocate the Palestinian population of Gaza into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula or place the territory under Egyptian control. Trump appeared to be laying the groundwork for a perilous trade-off: Nile water security in exchange for Egypt's complicity. Whether in the form of accepting the displacement of Palestinians into Sinai, assuming administrative control over Gaza, or, at a minimum, becoming further entangled in a resolution favorable to Netanyahu. Such a resolution would aim to eliminate resistance, subdue Gaza permanently, or facilitate its incremental absorption by Israel, mirroring developments in the West Bank. These scenarios, while alarming, remain within the realm of political imagination embraced by Israel's most influential supporters. Trump's recent posture is not an aberration. It reflects the worldview captured in his book, Plan for Success Across Multiple Fronts, knowing that only some options will come to fruition. A long-standing position. To understand Trump's stance, it is important to recall his consistent opposition to the dam project during his first term. In 2020, as Ethiopia commenced its first unilateral filling of the dam, Trump ordered a reduction of $130 million in U.S. aid to Addis Ababa. This was viewed as a rare instance of Washington penalizing an African state over Nile-related negotiations. Trump's interest in African affairs had previously seemed minimal. Thus, his open warning shortly afterwards was all the more surprising. Speaking publicly about Sudan's prospective normalization with Israel, Trump remarked, almost in passing, that Egypt will end up blowing up the dam, adding, "I said it, and I say it loud and clear, they'll blow up that dam. And they have to do something." It's highly probable that Trump solely blamed Addis Ababa for the failure of the Washington negotiations. At the time, Trump was personally overseeing the U.S.-brokered negotiations, with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and World Bank officials taking part. Ethiopia eventually withdrew, accusing the U.S. of abandoning its role as mediator and aligning with Egypt's legal and diplomatic framing of the dispute. What more Trump could have done to influence Ethiopia remains unclear. His administration's aggressive stance only reinforced Ethiopian skepticism, validating a nationalist narrative that painted U.S. involvement as neocolonial interference. In Addis Abeba's telling, historical water rights treaties, dating back to the colonial era, were skewed in favor of Egypt and must now be corrected. Such arguments have gained traction in Western academic and policy circles, including in the U.S. and Europe. They were also reflected in the Biden administration's more conciliatory approach. Upon taking office, Biden lifted the aid freeze and disengaged from the dam negotiations, refocusing instead on Ethiopia's civil war in Tigray. His administration issued only vague diplomatic statements, and Egypt had to turn to the failed African Union-led mediation. The net result was to create space for Ethiopia to complete construction and successive fillings of the dam, effectively removing international constraints. A broader agenda? When Trump claims that the U.S. funded the project, he is not referring to direct financial support. Rather, he is pointing to a broader context, the Biden administration's disengagement and its implicit signaling that the U.S. would not obstruct Ethiopia's efforts. Since Egypt's appeal to the UN Security Council in July 2021, the diplomatic track has cooled. The genocidal war against Christians of northern Ethiopia, Tigray, that lasted for 2 years absorbed most U.S. attention, and Egypt found itself navigating the crisis alone. But Trump's comments may also reflect deeper ambitions. One plausible interpretation is that he is using the dam dispute as leverage in other negotiations, such as his broader Middle East policy or his desire to present himself once again as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. The redirection of Nile waters to Israel, the Nile to Israel pipeline, from fantasy to folly. The idea of diverting Nile water to Israel is not a recent invention. In 1903, during a visit to Egypt, Theodore Herzl proposed to the British colonial authorities and the government of Khedive Abbas Helmi II the creation of a Jewish homeland in northern Sinai, to be designated the Egyptian province of Judea, under a 99-year concession. This proposal included full sovereign rights for Herzl over the designated territory, with future negotiations anticipated regarding the delivery of Nile water, a prospect that Egypt rejected outright on the grounds that it would entail altering the natural course of the river. The late renowned journalist Kamel Zohiri devoted a chapter of his book The Nile in Danger to documenting this episode. The concept resurfaced during the early phase of Egyptian-Israeli normalization. In September 1979, during a visit to Haifa, President Anwar Sadat reportedly told Begin, "Why not send you some fresh water to the Negev? You are good neighbors." Israeli and American newspapers interpreted the remark as a breakthrough. But the comment was omitted from Egyptian coverage. The alarm only truly sounded when Egypt began digging the Peace Canal in November 1979. A month later, in December, October magazine published a report titled, "The New Zamzam Project," citing Sadat's directives to deliver Nile water to Jerusalem, to be accessible to worshippers visiting the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Western Wall. He was quoted as saying, "We will make this water a contribution from the Egyptian people, in the name of hundreds of millions of Muslims, in commemoration of the peace initiative." The backlash was immediate and fierce. Parliamentarians, newspapers, and political parties condemned the idea. Dr. Naimat Ahmed Fouad, writing in Al-Shab newspaper, called it a matter of life and death, warning against the cultivation and prosperity of the Negev, the qualitative imbalance, the entrenchment of Israel and its expansion towards Sinai and into Arab oil locations, and the encirclement of Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Israel expressed support for increased Nile water shares from Ethiopia. Widely viewed NBC anchor Amar Adib said in his show, The Story, that if the Israelis swore that they have nothing to do with the Nile water, he would not believe them. However, while the prevailing tone in Cairo is to remain suspicious of Israel when it comes to the Nile, former Egyptian diplomat and current president of Alexandria Library Mustafa El-Feki nevertheless expressed a different opinion, arguing instead that Cairo should utilize its regional influence to open direct channels with Israel and seek assistance to maximize leverage over Ethiopia. Historically, Egyptian elite circles have been obsessed with the idea that Israel is trying to steal the Nile water. Proponents of this narrative argue the Torah identifies Israel's correct borders as between the Nile River and the Euphrates River. A popular but unsubstantiated justification for this argument claims the entrance to the Knesset bears an inscription with this specific Torah excerpt. In 2021, a report by General Hamdi Al-Batran published by Dostur newspaper explained that Israeli interest in the Nile can be linked back to 1903, when Theodore Herzl proposed to the British government a plan for the transferal of water from the Nile through Suez Canal and then into Palestine. Notably, there was an offer made by President Anwar Sadat to the Israelis back during 1979 talks, when Sadat suggested that Egypt pipe fresh water from the Nile River across the Sinai Peninsula to the Negev Desert, according to this archived Washington Post article. Indeed, this issue has proven to crop up periodically as former President Hosni Mubarak grappled with supposed Israeli interest in the Nile. In 1997, during the opening ceremony of the El Salam Canal, Mubarak announced it as purely an Egyptian project and water is too scarce to be shared with others. It was an indirect answer to his domestic critics, who were claiming that he would sell the Nile water to Israel through the Sinai-based project. Setting aside Israeli interests, Trump may see the GERD dispute as yet another opportunity to bolster his case for a Nobel Peace Prize, or as a pressure point to extract quick diplomatic wins for his administration. He may also view it as a convenient flashpoint for stirring tensions within the BRICS bloc, to which both Egypt and Ethiopia belong, particularly amid concerns about their potential future cooperation in ways that could diminish U.S. influence in favor of China.